Category 1 storm. But before being reclassified, Laura barreled into Louisiana's coastline early Thursday as a Category 4 storm, the strongest to hit there in more than a century. Winds whipped up to 241 kilometers an hour. That's about the same speed as a Formula One racing car. Now, the U.S. National Weather Service has warned that Laura's storm surge could be unsurvivable. More than 600,000 people are under mandatory evacuation orders in Louisiana and Texas. Let's get right to Darren Lynn. He is in Houston, Texas for us. Thanks so much for being with us again, Darren. I mean, tell us first what the storm has been like. I mean, it seems Houston fell just outside the worst of it, but Louisiana has really suffered.
Correct. Here in Houston, we're very fortunate. Originally, the storm was supposed to make a direct hit to us, but over the past 24 hours, it veered about 200 miles east of us to Louisiana and East Texas, and the 140 mile per hour, 150 mile per hour sustained winds for a Category 4 storm that devastated that area instantly. Wind knocked out windows from high rises, rooftops being blown off of homes, trees being shredded, power lines going down, 500,000 people without power right now, and it flipped over cars, trucks, and trailers like you and I would flip over a cardboard box. So the devastation instantly, the moment that Laura made landfall, was seen, and unfortunately, search and rescue efforts are going to take time because of all the flooding from the rains and the storm surge, as you mentioned. So this recovery process is probably going to take at least several days to begin, much yet several weeks to continue.
Right. Okay, so the storm, from what we know now, is no longer as dangerous. It has been downgraded to a Category 1. But talk a little bit more about that storm surge that could prove catastrophic. I mean, how bad could this still get?
Storm surges aren't just a one-time event. So even though the storm surge was about 9 to 11 feet, think about that. The house behind me, from the floor to the ceiling, is about 9 feet. So the water goes through, and the forecaster had the storm surge going 30 to 40 miles inland. So Lake Charles, Louisiana is about 30 miles inland. And that water is like having high tide, low tide. It doesn't come out with just one flow. It's going to take several days for the water to come out. That is going to hinder rescue efforts, because even though more than 500,000 people were told to evacuate, many stayed to ride out the storm. And if they were trapped in their attic or trapped in their home with those floodwaters, when rescue efforts get to those homes, the possibility is that it could turn out to be a very deadly situation once they reach everyone who was trapped.
Right. And what about those who were evacuated? I mean, how are people faring, especially since the rules of social distancing are supposed to be observed to prevent the spread of COVID-19?
This is making situations more complicated, because covering Hurricane Harvey 3 years ago and Hurricane Katrina even 15 years ago, just the recovery in the beginning stages is terrible, because you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that need a place to go and shelter. And before, they were packed into one shelter. So the municipalities tried to find areas in which they could socially distance the spaces in those shelters. But what happens is, it's not just a temporary situation. These folks are going to come back to their homes and realize that they don't have a home to come back to. So they're going to need to stay somewhere temporarily, and to house all those people with the COVID-19 pandemic right now is going to be very difficult. Emergency responders are wearing their masks and their gloves, and for residents who don't have personal protective equipment, they're being given those masks, given those gloves, hand sanitizers. But yes, this is going to be a very tricky situation to watch out for, because now you have the devastation from the hurricane, you add that to the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is just yet another tragedy that is probably going to take place in the weeks to come.
Okay, Darren Lynn joining us there. Thanks so much for that. Stay safe in Houston. Now, still to come on the NewsHour, the impact of the Great